With only 4 weeks of the fantasy football regular season remaining, this is going to be a crucial time to get our lineups set as airtight as we could possibly make them, trust our process, and take that pivotal next step in securing a 2025 fantasy championship. I'm John Macri, and for this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, IDP edition, I will be going game by game, breaking down all of the IDP relevant information heading into week 11. So let's get it. All right. Yes, week 11. And yes, I did. I survived my man cold last week. It was touch and go there for a bit, but came out on the other side okay and ready to go here for week 11. So I appreciate everybody with the well wishes. That was very nice of you. And yeah, we're ready to roll for week 11, man. It's a big one this week. Only 2 teams on a bye, so we'll have a lot to go over as usual. Before we get into it all, as always, if I could ask you guys to hype the channel, like the channel, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff that helps me a ton, helps the channel a ton, and obviously I really do appreciate. So if you could do that, as always, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you do want access to anything that I'm writing or anybody's writing over at pff.com, or you want access to rankings and player grades, all that stuff, you can get access to it with a PFF Plus subscription if you use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25, which will give you an additional 25% off. That'll include the IDP Fantasy Report as well. I'll attach that in the comments. I think I remembered last time. I think I did. I'll attach that in the comments as usual. And we'll be good to go. It'll have everything you need in there. Waiver wire targets, snap shares, utilization, my notes, all that stuff from each of the past week in IDP. So let's focus on this week now, and we'll start things off on Thursday Night Football. Should be an absolute banger, as Thursday Night Football tends to be. The New York Jets and the New England Patriots. We got to start with the Jets linebackers, right? We kind of have to start here because the news came out after we finished recording last week that Quincy Williams was being benched. He broke that news himself, although Kiko Mauigoa, who was going to be his replacement, was also still in concussion protocol. So that did complicate things, right? And they did kind of bench Quincy last week because Michael Walker, he got the start over Quincy. Obviously looked awful, and then they just went with Quincy the rest of the way. He looked pretty good to his credit, right? So he had, I think, a sack and 7 tackles in there. It was against the Browns, and it's probably not too hard to look like a capable NFL linebacker against the Browns. But it's also entirely possible that Kiko Mauigoa here clears the concussion protocol in time for this Thursday Night Football game. And if he does, it's really hard to trust, I think, either player, right? Like, because the Jets, they can stick with their, we hate Quincy agenda, or, do they feel like he earned his job back after a pretty strong performance last week? It's a stupid situation that they've put us in, honestly. And for me, at least, like, it's really not worth messing with at this point, because we just don't know whether Quincy is going to start or if he's actually benched. We don't know until we see it, really, with Mauigoa back in the lineup. So for me, if Mauigoa is cleared, then I think, Quincy, Schrodinger, Williams there should just stay on benches in week 11. Same thing with Mauigoa, really. Like, it's not worth it at this point in the season, especially in a poor matchup too, right? Like, not a great tackle matchup here for the linebackers. We'll just stick with Jamie Ensure gives me wood, and that is really it for now for the Jets linebackers. For the Jets defensive line, Will McDonald had 4 sacks, EIEIO. I don't know that we're expecting a 4-sack game again, obviously, right? Of course not. But it is a nice matchup here for the Jets defensive linemen, which is really just, it's McDonald and Jermaine Johnson at this point, because the Patriots O-line, like, they've been solid, but Drake May is 3rd in the league in pressure to sack conversion rate allowed. So he'll take some sacks for sure, right? We're not, necessarily considering McDonald or Johnson like must starts depending on like who your other options are, but they are startable if that makes sense. So if it doesn't, please reach out in the comments. I'll do my best to make it more confusing. But no, Will McDonald, Jermaine Johnson, like if you're looking for sack upside this week, I think it's there in this matchup against the Jets. We'll find out. But obviously, we're not expecting 4 sacks again from Will McDonald, just knowing that these guys are decent pass rushers. They get decent playing time, and Drake May creates a decent matchup. Jets defensive backs. So it is a poor matchup for the safeties here. Tony Adams and Malachi Moore. They surprisingly both led the team in tackles last week. That was more matchup related than these guys actually being great tacklers or anything. They can be useful if you need them because they're full-time players, but just like a below average matchup. So I'm not frothing at the mouth, to get them in my lineups right now. Just again, startable options if needed. Let's go to New England. We'll start with their linebackers, and we'll see if Christian Ellis is back or not this week. If he is, then I'm probably avoiding both him and Jack Gibbons. If Ellis isn't able to go, then Gibbons, he should be a fine play. Again, more for deeper leagues. Like, yeah, he actually led the team in tackles last week, but he did it playing just 59% of the snaps. That's the reason that he's going to be only a deep league option, right? Like, don't look at the 10 tackles from last week and necessarily expect that again. It's possible, sure, but the odds are against him, right? And with that lower snap share, that's what we're trying to do is we're playing the odds. We're going to increase our chance of winning here. So Spillane is the 100% linebacker. He's a fine play for this week in a neutral matchup where you have / need him. Patriots defensive line. So Caleb Von Chason, he's fit in quite nicely with the Patriots so far in that they're giving him playing time, and he's been relatively productive. He's actually having a career year in terms of sacks with 6.5 on the year right now. So that's impressive for a player who, by all accounts is / was like a first round bust. Chason and Harold Landry, both of these guys are in play here in a good matchup. They're more obviously your volume dependent options as always, but this time, again, in a good pass rush matchup where Justin Fields owns a top 5 pressure to sack conversion rate, which is bad for a quarterback's perspective, good from a pass rusher's perspective. And the Jets O-line is also at bottom 10 in the league in terms of pass blocking, right? So both of those guys can be in play if you need them. Milton Williams, Christian Barmore can hopefully deliver this week. Both players are actually among the top 10 defensive tackles in total pressures this season, but they are outside the top 12 in like DT scoring for IDP. Like they're fine because of volume and production, like and just being productive because of that volume. But we'll hopefully like to see more of that production with the volume. And again, in a good matchup here this week. So we'll see how they do on Thursday night. Patriots defensive backs, Marcus Jones, always kind of the one that people want to know about. He's been getting more playing time than your typical nickel corner, only because he stays on the field for the most part. It's still not perfect usage, but they'll often leave him out there in most cases. That being said, the Jets are slightly above average in terms of 11 personnel rate, so he'll continue to get his work in the slot, hopefully come up with a big play. The concern for, I think, all of the Patriots defensive backs is whether Justin Fields can throw for more than 55 yards in a game and actually create production opportunities for our New England IDPs, especially those in the Pac-7. But yeah, man, Fields, he's thrown for fewer than 55 yards 4 times this season as a starter. 4. The guy he's an absolute yo-yo in what we're going to get from him each week. So we'll see here on a short week, but not overly hopeful for with Fields anymore. Alrighty, another international game this week. This one taking place in Newfoundland, Canada. So shout out to all the Newfies who will be at the game this week. Please enjoy. Marcus Mariota versus Tua turned the ball over. Now, let's start with Washington and their linebackers because I think last week was like the first time all year that I had put some faith in Frankie Louvu to have a good game, and I really should have known better. It was just another mid-slop tackle production game, even in an ideal matchup. Like he had like a 5% tackle rate. It's just an FU to me. It felt very personal from Mr. Luvu. So yeah, now he's an op, as the kids say. No, whatever. The outlook for Luvu, like again, it doesn't really change. Same boom bust production with the bust more likely. Again, we talked about it a lot in the offseason. He was the most overrated IDP heading into the season. He was like LB6 on that fast draft app, which was mind boggling to me. And he's showing he's nowhere close to that as expected. So Bobby Wagner, meanwhile, IDP Hall of Famer over here, LB2 on the year, continues to be excellent. He'd be locked in for me again this week, even in a poor matchup. And then Jordan Tits McGee, he played just 39% of the snaps last week. So that usage of Luvu being like a primary edge and Tits McGee backfilling more at off-ball linebacker has started to fade a little bit. So we'll take him out of play for deeper leagues as well. Washington's defensive line, it's a good matchup because the Miami offensive line is poor, and Tua will take sacks, although somehow in the upside down matchup against the Bills last week, Tua didn't take a single sack and the Dolphins beat the Bills. Unreal. Look, that right there is why we should never be overconfident in our evaluations or analysis when it comes to the NFL, because as much as we think we know what's going to happen, there is always a ton of variance that throws a wrench into things, right? Like, again, it's all about increasing our odds with the data and the information that we have, so we're not completely unarmed and heading into the week, which is what this show exists for, right? But you'll never hear me guarantee anything unironically, I guess, because anything can happen, any given Sunday, yada, yada, yada. The main thing for me is I better damn well be right more than I'm wrong. And my process has to be clean to justify the misses, right? So hopefully that's the experience you guys have with my content and understand when I'm not 100% accurate. But yeah, anyways, I'm rambling about nothing at this point. Basically, trust your process. Understand that there's going to be times when it's not 100% right. Like the Dolphins beating the Bills is one of those situations. The same thing goes with IDP and fantasy and all those things, the matchups, all that stuff can look great. It's not a guarantee to translate to the field every single week. So yeah, let's get back on track. 30 teams to cover, man. Jesus. Let's go. Okay. Washington's defensive line. Yes, that's what I was talking about. Oh my God. Daron Payne, he was suspended for a game for throwing a punch at Amon-Ra St. Brown, which, okay, man. Yeah, maybe Amon-Ra said Payne's mother wears army boots or something. Who knows? But at least he didn't spit at him like Jalen Carter. But yeah, let's not spend any more time on these guys. Hopefully you're not relying on them this week. Washington's defensive backs. Okay, so I think we've cracked the code with the Washington safeties because it's a very complicated pattern that probably only National Treasure's Nicolas Cage could ever unravel. As we know, it's been inconsistent usage and rotation for the safeties in Washington since like week 6. There's been no consistent full-time player at safety. But the pattern is this. Now, if you have a pen and paper ready to kind of decipher this riddle, you're going to need it. Here we go. Ready? Week 6, Quan Martin led the team in snaps. Jeremy Reeves didn't play full-time. Week 7, Jeremy Reeves led the team in snaps. Quan Martin didn't play full-time. Week 8, Quan Martin led the team in snaps. Jeremy Reeves didn't play full-time. Week 9, Jeremy Reeves led the team in snaps. Quan Martin didn't play full-time. Week 10, Quan Martin led the team in snaps. Jeremy Reeves didn't play full-time. Okay, that's it. They are alternating one of the two to stay on the field each week, and that is it. I don't understand what the thought process is there, but if that pattern holds, Jeremy Reeves should play more this week and Quan Martin won't be full-time. Now, again, we'll see if now that we're onto their BS, if they actually stick to that stupid rotation, but this is the level of defensive genius that we're dealing with right now in Washington. Also for Mikey Sanders still, like there'll probably be less slot snaps for him this week against the Fish, who are below average in 11 personnel. So he'll be a lower end cornerback required option this week. But yeah, mostly just not playing around with the Washington DBs. On to Miami. We'll start with their linebackers. Commanders still giving up the 11th most tackles per game to the linebacker position. That obviously dropped off last week against the Lions linebackers, who really disappointed. Obviously, I talked about this actually on IDP Bets with Johnny the Greek last week, discussing Jack Campbell's tackle line and how Mariota at quarterback is actually a good thing for our linebackers because the Commanders run the ball at a higher rate with him under center compared to Jaden Daniels. That was the case again last week. It just didn't equal much production for the Lions linebackers. So I think as long as that run heavy philosophy remains, we'll be just fine here matchup wise for our linebackers. So yeah, Jordan Brooks, Tyrell Dodson, of course, remain in lineups here this week. Miami's defensive line, Bradley Chubb, Zach Sealer, and potentially Chop Robinson can all be in play here this week. Chubb is the top edge rusher on the team right now, with Jalen Phillips gone to a better place. And he'll be in that kind of fringe edge 2, edge 3 conversation again this week. Chop should be back from concussion protocol this week. I still think he'll probably cede like the early down snaps to Matthew Judon more than we'd like, but he'll be a fine kind of boom bust type option right now because he should get more work rushing the passer at least. And then Zach Sealer, a perfectly fine starting defensive tackle option in defensive tackle required leagues. Miami's defensive backs, slightly below average matchup for the safeties here. Minkah is still, I think, the top option, although Dante Trader did actually play ahead of Ifeatu Melifonwu last week, which is a positive development for him. Now, he'll still have to worry about Ashton Davis for now, where if Davis is active, then we probably don't trust Dante Trader. If Davis isn't active, though, then Trader can be good to go. So usage was fine for Trader last week, 26% in the box, very similar to Minkah. So those guys being used pretty interchangeably in that defense. Okay, I want to let you all know that this PFF betting segment is brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. Every yard, every sack, every interception, and every touchdown. With Pick 6, DraftKings' newest game, every snap can turn into a big-time payout. This isn't just watching the game, this is playing to win. Here's how it works. Pick more or less on 2 or more player stats. The better your picks, the bigger the payout. It's that simple. Pick 6 gives you more upside than any of those other pick'em sites, and it's available in most states, including Texas, California, Georgia, Missouri, and more. Go bold, go big, and start stacking wins with Pick 6 from DraftKings, where every pick can pay off huge. New DraftKings customers get $50 in Pick 6 credits with just a $5 entry on your first pick set. You know the game, now make it pay. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code PFF. That's code PFF. Play just $5. Get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Make the call. Ride the upside. In partnership with DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 14 days. Ends December 2nd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. Terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. On to the Los Angeles Chargers and the Jacksonville Jaguars now. So we'll start with the Chargers linebackers. Diane Henley still really kind of disappointing for IDP. Not sure what the problem is here, but he is playing 100% of snaps in a zone-heavy defense. Now, the only thing is the Chargers are near the bottom of the league in run rate against, meaning teams are mostly passing against them, which we don't love for tackle potential as much, especially for linebackers. And the Jaguars are just below league average in terms of run rate. So Henley will once again kind of be on the low end of full-time linebackers this week, again in the rankings. Meanwhile, Denzel Perriman played just under 50% of snaps last week. He's only an option in like super deep leagues at this point. Chargers DBs, Derwin has been fairly quiet recently. He's at least getting a positive matchup here. The Jaguars are giving up the 4th most tackles per game to the safety position. I do expect a nicer game from Derwin this week. They have been pretty 3 safety heavy, though. I will say that. Last week it was Elijah Molden and RJ Mickens getting pretty heavily involved, and they could be fine plays if you need them considering the matchup. Mickens is more of kind of the deeper league option since he's not likely to be an every down safety. And then Chargers defensive line. It was nice to see Khalil Mack bounce back last week after doing literally nothing against the Tennessee Titans the week before. And then Tuli Tuipulotu now has a 3-game sack streak, 4 sacks in his last 5 games, and he has 8 on the year. So he's been playing really well. It's a neutral matchup, so both Mack and Tuli should be fine plays once again this week. They're getting plenty of snaps to come through with at least usable IDP production, and obviously they carry sack upside as well. For the Jaguars, we'll start with their linebackers. We saw Devin Lloyd return last week, immediately played a near every down role. I think it was 96%. So Lloyd and Foye Oluokun both in a really nice spot here against the Chargers, who are giving up the 5th most tackles per game to the linebacker position. We like this matchup. We like the snap shares for both guys, and they'll both be starting options in most IDP formats this week, as is the case most weeks with them. Jaguars defensive line, Josh Hines-Allen, he went back to nada on the score sheet this past week. However, he draws a very nice matchup against the most banged up offensive line in the league, basically. They now rank 30th in pass blocking grade this year. Justin Herbert has been pressured on a league high 173 of his dropbacks. That is 43 more than the next closest player, which is Drake May. Bananas numbers, which has led obviously to Justin Herbert taking 33 sacks on the year. That's the 3rd most this season. So yeah, like we're going to trust Josh Hines-Allen again this week. Even Trayvon Walker, both of these guys, they play a ton, and if they put in any effort into this game whatsoever, that they should be able to be productive for IDP. And I think worth the starts here. And then Jacksonville's DBs. Last week we talked about Jerry Jones filling in for Jordan Lewis, and he was kind of an ideal streaming option for us if we needed him in CB required leagues. He absolutely delivered. He had a pick. He had 2 pass breakups, 2 TFLs, 4 total tackles. So we'll see if Jordan Lewis is back or not this week. If he is, then we're definitely not starting Jerry Jones. It's not like a great matchup for slot corners either. The Chargers actually playing a below average rate of 11 personnel. So yeah, not ideal either way for Jones or Lewis, whoever is getting the start at nickel. And then neutral matchup for safeties, Andrew Wingard, Antonio Johnson. They were both great last week, actually. They could both be fine as needed in positive matchups. This one is slightly above average. So yeah, both playing full time. Obviously, nothing extravagant as far as like usage goes. Just a couple of guys looking to make a living playing some football. You got to respect it. So yeah, don't mind them at all for IDP. On to Tampa Bay and Buffalo next. Tampa Bay linebackers, we'll start there really quickly. Levante, Servassier, they get a top 10 matchup for linebacker tackles this week. Levante should be fine as usual. Dennis, he had 1 single tackle last week. I'll go out on a limb and say he'll have more than that this week. He did play every single snap. He just wasn't very efficient at all. So he's a kind of a low-end full-time linebacker for us in IDP. Tampa Bay's defensive backs, Tyke Smith continues to prove that he is a matchup-proof IDP option and that he is him. He had one of the worst tackle matchups in the league last week for safeties, and all he did was put up 8 tackles, 1 for a loss, and then added a pick in there as well. The dude is an absolute baller. He should never leave lineups at this point. Antoine Winfield is a little bit more matchup dependent right now. We saw him come away with just 1 tackle last week in that bad matchup. It's a below average matchup this week, so he's not a must start by any means, but if you don't have like other great options, then he's still fine. We know he could come away with some big plays as well, and that'll help his day if needed. It's just a little harder to predict is all. And then a great matchup for the Bucs cornerback. So Zion McCollum is definitely in play as a worthy starting cornerback option. Jamel Dean potentially as well. Now, Jacob Parrish is the nickel, so his playing time is more dependent on opposing offenses. So, for example, last week, he actually only played just 48% of the snaps against New England, who is a well below average team in 11 personnel rate. This week, he's got the Bills, who are a little above average in that regard. So probably expecting between like 60 to 70% of snaps this week for Jacob Parrish. So just something to be aware of there. Tampa Bay's defensive lineman, a tough matchup for this pass rushing group, unfortunately. Like, I still trust Yaya Diaby the most, but he should see a lot of Deion Dawkins this week. Meanwhile, Anthony Nelson playing a ton of snaps with Hassan Reddick out, so he's going to be more of a volume-based play than anything else is Anthony Nelson. We're hoping for mostly tackles for him because it is a good tackle matchup for defensive linemen. Anything else from him is a bonus. Buffalo. Let's talk about their defensive backs. Yeah, we'll start there because Teron Johnson, he was out last week, and we saw the Bills really lean into 3 full-time safeties. Cole Bishop, he's the leader of the pack there right now. He's the top IDP option. He's been great. But also Cam Lewis and Jordan Poyer played full-time roles. Now, Lewis actually played more in the slot last week with Teron Johnson out of the lineup. So if Johnson is back this week, I would expect Lewis to go back to safety and then Poyer to just kind of be that sub package option like he was the week before. I actually like the matchup for whoever does end up in the slot for this game against the Bucs. The Bucs are top 10 in 11 personnel rate, and they are 7th in tackles per game to the cornerback position. So if Teron Johnson is available, it's a nice matchup for him. If he's not available, then Cam Lewis could be a nice option this week as well. Buffalo linebackers, Terrell Bernard continues to just be fine. That's kind of what he is, like nothing special at all from him this year. Below average tackle rate, not even averaging double-digit points per game this season. He's just a guy at this point. And I'm just a girl, asking him to pick up the pace and make some plays. But no. He's been frustrating. It's all I could say. I mean, we have enough mid linebackers bringing down the league average tackle rate right now. It's actually currently 12.9% among linebackers with at least 100% of snaps. So far, that's the lowest it's been for a while, and it's not too far off the norm, which is like 13.3%. But Bernard is not helping the cause, basically. So hopefully he gets going here. And then Matt Lano, just a deep league option as well. He's also just a part-time guy, not getting a ton of snaps or not getting enough snaps to be trusted in most formats. And he's definitely not nearly as effective as a tackler either. So yeah, Buffalo's linebackers been disappointing. Buffalo's defensive line. So yeah, Greg Russo, Joey Bosa, both failed us last week. I mean, the Bills, like we've talked about before, the Bills as a whole failed us. But again, we expect these guys to take advantage of positive matchups, which they didn't do against Miami last week, at least in terms of sacks. They did scrounge together some tackles, which was nice of them. This week, it's a little tougher of a task against the Bucs offensive line and Baker Mayfield. Mayfield actually owns a pretty strong 14.4% pressure to sack conversion rate. The Bucs are yielding just the 29th most tackles per game to the defensive line as well. So we're going to mostly be banking on the sacks this week. Just the odds are against like Bosa and Greg Russo. All right, let's go to Carolina and Atlanta next. And we'll start with Carolina's linebackers because Trevin Wallace suffered a shoulder injury in week 10. He did not come back into that game. So if Wallace is out, then Christian Roseboom will be back in that 100% snap linebacker role. And then Clouden Sherilis will be the LB2 who plays around 70-ish% of the snap. So it's a below average tackle matchup, but Roseboom has at least been one of the linebackers kind of doing his part to pull the league average tackle rate up. 15.5% tackle rate for him so far this year. Really nice. I don't mind Roseboom if Trevin Wallace is out. Carolina's defensive backs, Trayvon Merrick continues to kind of be rock solid for IDP, thanks to, again, that ideal usage. We can keep starting him every week. This is also an above average matchup for cornerbacks. And I know, what's his name? Chow Smith Wade had a pretty solid 6 tackle game last week. He was the primary nickel corner, but he also only played 46% of the snaps in a game where the Saints spent just 50% of their snaps in 11 personnel. So I'd probably expect another low snap share game from Smith Wade this week. So not trusting him in CB required leagues. Atlanta plays around 52% of snaps in 11 personnel so far this year. Carolina's defensive line, Nick Scorton is now up to 3 sacks in his last 4 games. He's been very volume dependent, and he still kind of is, right? But poor matchup for him this week. He's still mostly just the kind of a dynasty stash. Meanwhile, for DT required leagues, Derek Brown is racking up tackles and he locked into starting lineups, right? And then Tershawn Wharton as well, also playing a ton. He's averaging 84% of snaps over the last 3 games. Limited pass rush upside for both of these guys, really, but both can put up solid tackle numbers if you're looking for that. In Atlanta, we'll start with their defensive line. I don't want to jinx it, but are the Atlanta NPCs at defensive line becoming playable characters? Is the question I have, I guess, because if it is finally happening, it's thanks to the first round picks, Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. Both of those guys delivered strip sacks last week and are getting decent playing time. I might not be there yet with them as far as being startable IDPs, but hope at least is starting to come through for those NPCs actually becoming main characters for us. So it's not a great matchup for them this week since Bryce Young has been really good at avoiding sacks this year, but we're building up to it for these 2 rookies. Maybe they can save us from this longtime black hole Falcons defensive line that we've been stuck with. Atlanta's linebackers, it's only Caden Ellis. He's the only one worth trusting. It's a top 10 tackle matchup, so he'll be solid this week. The other spot with El Diablo on IR, it's being rotated with Ronnie Harrison and JD Bertrand. Neither guy seeming to run away with that LB2 spot, so we'll just wait until El Diablo returns. And then defensive backs for Atlanta, Jesse Bates and Xavier Watts are getting a ton of work in the box, and it's paying dividends for IDP here recently. They combined for actually 20 tackles in week 11. Each guy played over 40% of their snaps in the box. Now, they do get another positive matchup here for tackles and should once again, I think, be top options for IDP, which you love to see. All right, on to Cincinnati and Pittsburgh next. Starting with Cincinnati's defensive line because Trey Hendrickson still not expected back this week. So it's really just a big old pass on the Bengals defensive lines for IDP this week. They all suck. So yeah, not going to trust them. Cincinnati's linebackers, Barrett Carter still the top option here. He's the green dot 100% snap linebacker. And then Demetrius Knight comes in just below like a full-time role, but he'll be the deeper league option. Neutral matchup, so they could be fine as needed. And then Cincinnati's defensive backs, Jordan Battle. As long as his teammates didn't beat him to a pulp with like the soap in the sock, Full Metal Jacket style, after that missed tackle that allowed Colston Loveland to score in week 9, and they lost again, he should be back out there along with Geno Stone. They're fine options for IDP. It's a below average matchup. I mean, there's no way around it for the Bengals at this point. Like, their defense is abysmal and they don't really have the guys who we'd expect to be able to step in and improve it. So they're kind of stuck with what they got. So yeah, poor tackle matchup for the safeties and the cornerbacks this week. Yeah, unfortunately for IDP rosters who are maybe looking to bank on these guys, it's not great for them, but can be fine. For Pittsburgh, their defensive line, Alex Highsmith had his second straight 2-sack game last week and the week before. Obviously, that's how 2 straight works. Now, he gets the Bengals offensive line, which is also trash. However, Joe Flacco has been great at not letting that offensive line basically be his downfall. So we'll call it an average matchup here for Highsmith and obviously TJ Watt and Cam Hayward, who are, I think, still just top weekly starting options here for IDP. Pittsburgh's linebackers, my God. So yeah, unfortunately, the Steelers hate Peyton Wilson with a passion because even with Cole Holcomb out last week, they made Wilson share snaps with Malik Harrison. Now, Wilson only played 56% of snaps. Harrison played 45%. Like, honestly, like, just a joke of a deployment at this point. Like, when LB1 is Patrick Queen playing every single snap each week, it's crazy that the Steelers are rolling with this deployment. But Queen, he led the team in tackles this past week, and it was only the 3rd time all year that he's actually out tackled his LB2, whether that was Holcomb or Peyton Wilson, who are always playing fewer snaps than him. So yeah, Queen is still nothing more than kind of a low-end full-time linebacker for IDP. Wilson is purely for deep leagues at this point, considering just the team's disdain towards him. Pittsburgh's defensive backs, Kyle Duggar, Jalen Ramsey, those are the full-time safeties still. 2 weeks in a row now that we've seen that deployment from them. The problem is this week, it is a bad tackle matchup for Duggar and Ramsey. So very low-end options for IDP this week. Corner, it's a bit better. So Joey Porter Jr. specifically should be a solid like CB required option this week. Bengals giving up the 6th most tackles per game to the cornerback position. Green Bay and the New York Giants. Let's start with the Packers linebackers because it wasn't an amazing IDP performance from them last week by any means, but it was also a really bad matchup because the Eagles were dead last, or still are dead last, as far as giving up tackles to the linebacker position. So we're not going to hold that against Quaker and Cooper this week because they actually do get a positive matchup this week against the Giants, who are giving up the 6th most tackles per game to linebackers. Now, with Brian Daboll getting fired, we'll have to see how that affects the offense because maybe they run less or, different tendencies can all affect those tackle numbers. But let's assume it's not a dramatic change. And even if it is, there are still 2 100% linebackers in Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper who will be able to trust most weeks. Yeah. And then the same thing last week too with the defensive linemen for Green Bay. They kind of let us down a bit too, right? Micah Parsons, Rashawn Gary, they've been held without a sack for 2 straight games now. Parsons, look, we're going to leave him in lineups. We've had this conversation too many times, whether it's about Parsons or Myles Garrett. You've heard my ceiling reasoning too many times by this point in the season, so I won't do it again. Gary, more of an edge 2 type most weeks. So if you have a better player than him, sure, you can put him in. But Parsons, for the most part, we're just sticking with him. And look, now Jameis Winston is going to get his first start of the year for the Giants. So Jameis hasn't thrown a single pass this year. So we'll see how he looks. I know last year he had a 23.3% pressure to sack conversion rate, which is pretty high, though that was behind the Browns offensive line. So we've seen Jackson Dart struggle to stay upright this year. We'll see how Jameis does. And those are Dart's pressure to sack conversion numbers on the screen there. Yeah, I just didn't feel like updating it. I'll be honest, with just since we didn't have any Jameis data to replace it with. So yeah, you're looking at Dart data. And speaking of Dart, all of you Legend of Dragoon lovers who were on me to play that one, I have made progress. I'm about 5 to 6 hours in, and yeah, loving it already. So ton of fun, great characters. Really liking like the active turn-based style, which I'm sure was inspired E33 Expedition 33 as well, right? So yeah, more peak PS1 JRPGs for the win. Yeah, great call, all of you. Anyways, back to it. Yeah, we'll wrap this up so I can go back and play more Legend of Dragoon once I'm done. Green Bay's defensive backs, poor matchup for the DBs, pretty much all around here in Green Bay. So Xavier McKinney really still the only every down safety. So he's a fine play, just not a high end play. And then cornerbacks, it's between Carrington Valentine and Keyshawn Nixon. But again, in a bad matchup, hopefully we can find better streaming options this week. Giants, we'll go to them. Their defensive line, Brian Burns was actually held without a sack for only the 2nd time this season last week. So this pretty wild considering that we're in week 11, but and Burns has played every game. But look, that's why he's edge 1 on the year so far. He's just been so good. So it is a tougher pass rush matchup this week with Jordan Love being excellent at avoiding sacks. But yeah, Burns is still, we're not going to bench him. He's been too good. Not this year. He's going to stay in our lineups. And then again, Kayvon Thibodeau and Abdul Carter, like they are more avoidable this week. And I'll keep saying it. Carter is definitely a buy low in Dynasty right now. Better days ahead. I know fantasy trade deadlines are coming up soon. Maybe that's one you can pull off if you're a team that's maybe out of the playoffs or looking to rebuild on the dynasty side of things. You can maybe potentially grab an Abdul Carter if Abdul Carter is on a contender, which it's possible, right? Because going near the end of the first round, most times, maybe those playoff teams have Abdul Carter stashed away and could use some help. Something to consider. All right, Giants linebackers, great matchup for Bobby Okereke. he really needs these great matchups to be like a great IDP. But yeah, he's fine, good to go. The LB2 spot, it seems like Darius Moassau is going to miss another game, so Demetrius Flanagan Fowles will be our kind of deeper league option, probably in that 70 to 80% of snap range. And in a good matchup, he can definitely have some use for us in those deeper leagues. And then on the defensive back side of things, it's not a great matchup for Tyler Nubin and Javon Holland. But again, 100% snap safeties, they're fine. And at cornerback, Drew Phillips has been really kind of hit with a stretch of bad matchups for like, at least for playing time, basically facing a lot of non-11 personnel heavy offenses. So the Packers also come in below average in that regard. So Phillips isn't really in play here this week in most CB required formats. Paulson Adebo maybe comes back this week, hopefully. Otherwise, it's Cordell Flott, which Houston and Tennessee. So yeah, I mean, we'll start with the Texans defensive line because Danielle Hunter did indeed bounce back as we expected last week, and he did it in the form of a 3.5 sack performance. I mean, we figured he'd have a good game, right? We talked about that, but this was definitely making up for lost time. I had written about Daniel Hunter as a buy low candidate coming out of week 9 in the IDP report, just because of his incoming matchups last week, obviously against the Jags, and this week coming up against the Titans. Obviously, that window is closed now, but for those of you that do have him on your roster, you're definitely playing him this week against the Titans and our league sack fetishist Cam Ward. Obviously, Will Anderson as well. These guys are both top tier plays this week in a really juicy matchup, and hopefully they come through for us. Houston's linebackers, it's a poor matchup here for Azeez Al-Shaair and company. Al-Shaair is still really the only one we'll want to play from this group if we have to choose one. Meanwhile, Henky Two Toes, aka Henry To'o, and EJ Speed, they're kind of playing a game of musical chairs here at the LB2 spot. This past week, it was Speed who played more than Two Toes did the week before. So we're going to avoid the two of them until we get some consistency there in their usage, and especially in a bad tackle matchup. We don't need to be forcing either guy into our lineup this week. Houston's defensive backs, Jalen Petrie, if he's back. Otherwise, there's nobody else really worth it here. I know Kamari Lassiter delivered for IDPs, a few weeks because of some strong matchups, but a bad matchup last week, he didn't do much. Bad matchup again this week, not expecting much, right? So just keep that in mind that some of these outside corners are very matchup dependent. For Tennessee, they're linebackers. We have a great matchup here for the Tennessee linebackers. Houston is giving up the second most tackles per game to the linebacker position this season. So Cedric Gray, we know, should be able to take advantage of that, and he is a locked-in starter this week. Cody Barton, I still don't trust him to make a tackle, but it is at least a positive matchup. So if you need him, then it is at least a good week for him to trust. Tennessee's defensive line, let's just hope that Jeffrey Simmons is back this week, because there's nobody else to trust here on Tennessee's defensive line. We keep talking about it since it's happened, but the Texans are running 6 offensive linemen more often, which has really helped their pass blocking, and it keeps CJ Stroud or Davis Mills upright for the most part. So Simmons is really the only defensive lineman in Tennessee that I'd really kind of trust to overcome the matchup. And then Tennessee defensive backs, unfortunately, this safety situation has devolved into a kind of a complete mess, right? Like nobody's playing full time, or at least they haven't been recently. They're not even that good of IDPs to begin with, so they should be pretty easy to avoid this week. If you really have to, because it is at least a top 10 safety tackle matchup, then $5 Amani Hooker would be the best bet, but I don't feel great about it just because of the playing time. Chicago and Minnesota. Start with the Chicago linebackers, because TJ Edwards ended up missing last week's game with an injury, which was a little surprising. So we'll have to see if he's back this week. If not, then Penei Sewell's brother, Rigatoni Sewell, also called Noah Sewell, should be a fine fill-in as an every down linebacker. Tremaine Edmonds as well, find a role with him. Both of these guys are fine starters. Chicago's defensive line, Montez Sweat gets a decent matchup here against JJ McCarthy, who owns the second highest pressure to sack conversion rate in the league right now. Maybe Austin Booker purely based on volume because he's getting great playing time, but I think it's mostly going to be Montez Sweat this week for me. He's been really solid this year. We've talked about him a few times in previous weeks, but like what he's doing this season. And then Chicago's defensive back, CJ Gardner-Johnson, continues to cook in that Dennis Allen slot role, now coming off a game with 2 sacks and leading the team in tackles. And the best part is that Gardner-Johnson played 99% of snaps last week. So we could keep rolling with him if you got him. It's not the best matchup this week for cornerbacks, so keep that in mind. But the role is one that we've liked for a while now for IDP. So yeah, could be good there. Bad matchup for Jaquan Brisker and Kevin Byard, unfortunately. The Vikings, they rank dead last in tackles per game to the safety position. And over the last 3 games, they've allowed just 6 per game, which is insanely low. So be careful starting Brisker or Byard this week, basically. On to Minnesota, their defensive line. So Jonathan Grenard is expected to miss at least this week with an injury, maybe a little more time after that. We'll see. So Dallas Turner, once again, potentially steps into a volume heavy role. We've seen him play up to 90% of snaps when like Andrew Van Ginkel was out of the lineup. So wouldn't be surprised to see him do that again. He just needs to be more effective with those snaps. He's going up against Caleb Williams, who has actually been one of the best quarterbacks in the league in terms of pressure to sack conversion rate after being one of the worst in the league last season in that regard. So yeah, definitely makes for a tougher matchup this week. And that includes Andrew Van Ginkel as well, right? Who's already not really a high-end pass rusher, but he also drops into coverage a ton. So his sack upside is severely limited because of that. He could come away with tackles and big plays still, but this is obviously not like the edge one Andrew Van Ginkel that we got last year. He was obviously bound for regression. We talked about that a lot. And along with the injuries, we're definitely seeing that from him. So he's not a must start, but he's a fine IDP if needed. That's just kind of what he is. Minnesota's linebackers, Blake Cashman is a fine starter, as usual, in a neutral matchup. Eric Wilson, more for deeper leagues. He is playing a near every down role, but he's also getting a lot of work on the edge and rushing the passer. So his tackle numbers will likely be kept in check, and he'll be a little bit more sack dependent, very similar to Frankie Louvu's role, right? So be careful there. Know what you're kind of signing up for with Wilson, which is likely going to be more boom bust production with that kind of deployment. And then defensive backs for Minnesota, Josh Mattel is still a really solid IDP option, getting a ton of work in the box. 49% of snaps in the box last week, just didn't have much of a day at all. The Ravens were a below average matchup for safety tackles. It's at least a neutral matchup this week. Yeah, Mattel is fine. Harrison Smith, fine. Also, last week, it was a bad matchup for the Minnesota cornerbacks for tackles. This week, they get a much better matchup. So good news for like Byron Murphy Jr. for CB required leagues. All right, before we go on, I just want to let everybody know that this episode is brought to you by Fabric by Gerber Life. Parenting is filled with high-pressure decisions, and it can be difficult to tell if we've made the right choice for our kids' future. But here's a simple decision you can make today that could have a meaningful impact on your kids' future: opening a UGMA Kids Investment Account with Fabric to start their investment journey early and give them a financial head start. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Get started investing with as little as $1 a day, then manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. There are no contribution limits, multiple tax advantages, and they're SIPC insured up to $500,000, plus no commission fees and just a low flat monthly maintenance fee. Fabric has partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. Okay, San Francisco, Arizona is next. San Francisco's linebackers, Tatum Bethune and Sweet D Winters, Draw a neutral matchup here against the Cardinals. We know how good Bethune has been in terms of his elite tackle rate. He's pushing 18% at this point, which is pretty wild. Meanwhile, Sweet D just 11.2%. So yeah, winter is here now. It's literally snowing outside as I record this. So hopefully a positive omen that Winters can be a better tackler here in November and December. Otherwise, yeah, Bethune remains our high-end full-time linebacker, and Winters is on the low end of that spectrum. San Fran's DBs, both Malik Mustafa and Jair Brown, getting decent enough usage that they can be fine options most week. This week, we'll probably only get one of them having a usable IDP game based on the matchup. The Cardinals do rank 29th in tackles per game to the safety position. Both guys have been lining up in the box for over 40% of their snaps. So it's really good usage, much better than what we've gotten in years past from the 49ers safeties. I'd still probably lean Mustafa if I have to pick one this week. He's been a much better tackler so far this year. And then also Upton Stout, since we'll give an update there since he's their nickel cornerback and he's been productive this season. We talked about him a few times on the podcast, but the Cardinals do come in below average in terms of 11 personnel rate. So could see his snaps dip a little bit this week. And because it was interesting last week, right? They went up against the Rams, who have typically been an 11 personnel heavy offense. They only spent 50% of their snaps in 11 personnel last week. So Stout ended up only playing like 41% of the snaps. So always tricky when teams break tendency like that, and we don't know when it's coming. So that did hurt Upton Stout last week. This week, we can expect lower usage again, just considering the matchup. San Francisco's defensive line, Bryce Huff is back. So there's that. On to Arizona next. Talk about their defensive backs. Budda Baker, he has not really been delivering like the IDP production that he was obviously last season. That was always going to be difficult to sustain. Like we've talked about that before, but still one of the better tacklers at the position and now draws the best matchup for safety tackles this season. 10.6% tackle rate for Budda this year. That's an above average mark. Just hasn't really had the big plays, right? And those, they'll typically come with playing time, but it hasn't happened for him just yet. But again, the positive variance here in the second half of the season. Budda could come up with some big plays and really turn the season around. He's been fine. The tackles are still there. And I think, again, we're going to roll with him most weeks. So yeah, I think we should be more focused on the tackle potential, obviously, for any defensive back. And that really starts with their alignment, right? Like for Budda, he has no real concerns. 43% of his snaps in the box this season. And then obviously a strong tackle matchup here this week in week 11 against the 49ers. So yeah, definitely trusting Budda. I'm fine starting Jalen Thompson as well this week. Both of those guys are strong options. As far as the Arizona linebackers, Mac Wilson is going to be out again this week. So it'll be Cody Simon wearing the green dot. That news came out that Simon would be the signal caller after recording last week. And honestly, kind of surprising, right? That they'd give it to a rookie and not like the more experienced Akeem Davis-Gaither. But they clearly have their kind of role replacement options in Arizona. And it's not just like a depth chart slide when guys go down. So that's good to know here. And it's a decent matchup as well. So Simon should be in for a nice game. Akeem Davis-Gaither more for deeper leagues. Arizona's defensive line, Josh Sweat has been really solid, had a really nice game last week against Seattle. He's in that kind of fringe starter range for IDP pretty much every single week. Nothing overly intimidating matchup-wise this week for Sweat. He is going to match up against Trent Williams a bit, but not every play. He'll play both sides of the line. And then we'll see if Brock Purdy is back or not, or whether it'll be Mac Jones again. But yeah, Sweat remains the top option if you're looking for a pass rusher in this matchup. And Walter Nolan, I got a few questions about him last week after he had a really productive debut. Great for him. Obviously, we definitely love to see that from our rookies. It wasn't like the best performance pass rush metrics wise in that game. So he did kind of overachieve a bit. And then unfortunately got banged up last week and left the game, did not return. So we'll see if he's back this week, but more of kind of like a speculative DT required option for now, and still just a stash for dynasty purposes. All right, Seattle and the Rams are next. And let's start with the DBs for Seattle because I really just want to start with Nick Emenwari because I love this dude. I loved him coming out of the draft. We expected him to be Mike McDonald's new Kyle Hamilton in Seattle, and that path has kind of almost been one for one with Emenwari so far compared to rookie Kyle Hamilton because he's kind of the third guy in that safety group, though not really playing safety, but taking over that slot and box role and absolutely thriving in year one, just as we saw with Kyle Hamilton. The difference has been that Emenwari so far is doing it in a full-time capacity where Hamilton was getting rotated off a little bit more as a rookie. So obviously this has been huge for Emenwari, and his IDP potential, right? Like we mentioned it last week, how he should be viewed as the top IDP defensive back on this team right now. And he led the team in tackles and added a half sack as well. So we're just going to continue to love this dude. And obviously that slot and box heavy role is excellent. So yeah, love when teams deploy guys to their strengths, right? And this was a strength of Emenwari coming out of college. It was a big part of his game at South Carolina, lining up closer to the line of scrimmage, and it's translated here to the NFL. So I've got him as a top 10 defensive back this week in a great matchup for DB tackle production against the Rams. Now, unfortunately, Emenwari's great usage came at the cost of Devin Witherspoon, who was pushed to the outside a little bit more. We talked about that last week and how it'll limit his tackle production as it did this past week, right? So he's still a fine play in a great matchup, especially this week for Witherspoon, but we're really going to lean on Emenwari and like Ty Okada this week as our best Seattle defensive backs. And then Seattle's linebackers, Ernest Jones might be back this week. Still too early to tell, apparently, though. Like you guys listening on like Friday, for example, you'll probably know better by that point. So if Ernest is active, then he's good to start for IDP. If not, then it's Drake Thomas again as the 100% snap linebacker and Tyrese Knight as the part-time option. Obviously, Knight had a massive IDP game last week because he picked up 2 strip sacks. That's great and all, but we can't expect that to repeat, right? He played just 70% of the snaps. Thomas played full time. We've talked about it before, but Thomas, he's been a really poor tackler, and he's kind of been propped up by big plays. That continued last week with Knight out tackling him. I'm mostly kind of treating these guys with similar outlooks in a poor matchup, assuming Ernest doesn't play. If Ernest does play, then we should avoid Tyrese Knight and Drake Thomas would be a deep league option. And then Seattle's defensive line, another one to probably not expect to repeat performance from after last week. DeMarcus Lawrence delivered 2 defensive touchdowns on those Tyrese Knight strip sacks, which was pretty wild. That isn't happening again. We're still treating Lawrence and Uchenna Nwosu and Boye Mafe as kind of matchup dependent options, depending on who else is available to us in our IDP lineups, but nothing to get too excited about with these guys. And Byron Murphy and Leonard Williams still our top option for DT required leagues. Of course, Byron Murphy did absolutely nothing last week after highlighting how him and Williams are top 5 defensive tackle scorers. They had a great matchup, etc. Well, another big old FU to me on that one for Murphy, who literally didn't show up in the box score at all, despite playing 72% of snaps. So whatever, man. Still, still like him in DT required leagues, but that was some annoying shit for real. All right, let's go to the Rams. Their defensive line and really more annoying production from defensive linemen last week. Byron Young and Jared Verse were really quiet in a fine matchup, but didn't do much there. Tougher matchup for them this week too, with Sam Darnold being as great as he's been at avoiding sacks, and then you got Charles Cross at left tackle, which Verse and Young will both get time against. So yeah, not ideal for either guy. We hope that the talent allows them to kind of push through here, but they'll be on the lower end of edge one options this week. I think you still have to start them for the most part, but tempering expectations here for this Rams defensive line this week. Rams linebackers, really easy as always. Nate Landman is starting for us in a top 10 tackle matchup as well. Omar Spates, purely for deeper leagues. Easy. Let's move on. Rams defensive backs, Quentin Lake and Cam Curl both had solid days last week. We expected that coming in with that great matchup. Neutral matchup this week. I might worry a little bit about Lake since the Seahawks have been a poor tackle matchup for cornerbacks, and Lake is mostly going to qualify as a cornerback since he spends most of his time in the slot. I'm still probably going to roll with him because he's been so good, but just something to kind of, keep in mind, this week when choosing your starters. Ravens and Browns. Let's start with the Ravens defensive backs. Kyle Hamilton, another guy that disappointed last week. He had just one single tackle. And look, it was a really bad matchup against the Vikings, who ranked dead last in tackles per game to the safety position. We've already talked about them. We expect more from Kyle Hamilton, right? Especially considering his alignments. This week, at least, draws a much better matchup against the Cleveland Browns, who rank top 5 in tackles per game to the safety position. Hamilton hasn't, it's interesting. He doesn't have a lot of big plays this year, but he is in a much better position, I think, to start hitting on some of those big plays, given this recent shift toward the Ravens playing more 3 safety looks and allowing Hamilton to play closer to the line of scrimmage. Because over the last 3 games, Hamilton's actually averaging 7.3 blitz attempts per game, which was up from just 2.6 in his first 5 games. And that box snap share has also obviously improved to 34% over the last 3 compared to just 27% in the weeks prior. But he's also getting more work in the slot and on the defensive line, right? So it's been a much better deployment for Kyle Hamilton. And we've seen it. Like we've seen, he's getting more pressures, he's getting more QB hits, things like that. So the big plays will come for Kyle Hamilton. We're not overly concerned there. Baltimore linebackers, Roquan is absolutely locked into lineups in a great matchup. No analysis needed there. Teddy Buchanan has lost snaps with the team deploying more 3 safety looks. We've covered that before and why it's hurt Buchanan's value. I think he played just 59% of snaps last week. So really just a deep league option for us, even in a great matchup. And then Baltimore's defensive line, Mike Green, Kyle Van Noy, those are your snap leaders on the edge in Baltimore. Although newly acquired Draymond Jones worked in behind them a fair bit last week, he played 60% himself. So if you're in a desperate spot for a streaming option at defensive line, like this is kind of the matchup to target. None of these guys are elite pass rushers by any means right now, but they're getting the snaps. The Browns offensive line is the worst in the league, and that's led to Dylan Gabriel taking some sacks. And then in DT required leagues too, Travis Jones really been kind of heating up here over the last 2 games. He's getting the snaps as well. The production is following. So like him as a DT streaming option this week if you need it. For Cleveland, we'll start with their linebackers because we got a surprise waxing of the bush last week because Carson Schlesinger didn't miss the game as originally expected, and that kept Devin Bush back down under 90% of snaps. So obviously it's great that Schwess didn't miss any games. We love that. Also now the betting favorite for defensive rookie of the year, which is wild and cool to see for a linebacker, but safe to play for IDP as well, most importantly. And the Ravens linebacker tackle matchup has improved from the start of the year when they were near the bottom of the league, which never really made sense to me. Now those things are, starting to turn around here. And with Lamar back as well, they've also been better than their season average as far as tackles to the linebacker position. So Schwess and Bush go back to their kind of usual spots in lineups where we've been using them. Cleveland's defensive line, still mostly just Myles Garrett, because even Alex Wright, who was a deeper league option, he got hurt last game. I think it was a quad injury. He did not return to that game. And then Mason Graham for DT required leagues. He's been improving as well. He had a 90.3 pass rush grade last week, albeit against the Jets, but still playing time is there. And if he can start being more consistent as a pass rusher, he'll definitely have a potential, weekly DT required starting spot for us. Just might not be there yet. And then Cleveland's DBs, below average matchup here for Ronnie Hickman and Grant Delpit. Even worse matchup for like Tyson Campbell and the cornerback. So mostly just looking at the safeties here, both guys getting decent usage to be productive, but not excited about plugging them into lineups this week. All right, Kansas City and Denver. Let's start with Kansas City's defensive line because George Karlaftis and company draw a pretty difficult matchup this week. Number 1 pass blocking unit in the league is the Denver Broncos, and the best quarterback in the league is in terms of pressure to sack conversion rate, which is Bo Nix. So Karlaftis, he's been a really solid IDP for us this season. He's actually in the midst of a career year in terms of his underlying metrics, which includes a 78.3 pass rush grade that ranks 20th at the position. He'll play both sides of the defensive line, which will also have him lining up against Garrett Bowles, who owns the best pass blocking grade in the league. So snap volume, strong tackle numbers, that'll keep Karlaftis in play for us this week, more as a low end DL2, I think, this week. But tougher matchup all around for the pass rushers, and Chris Jones too, who just hasn't really been Chris Jones this year. So he is more avoidable if you need to. Kansas City's linebackers, Nick Bolton, he continues to be a top option, even in a below average matchup. He's been really effective as a tackler this season, so I'd be good with him in my starting lineup, less so with Drew Tranquil, obviously. And then DBs for Kansas City, Chamari Connor, still a top end start. He's been awesome this year. Trent McDuffie and Jalen Watson for CB required leagues, both strong options in a great matchup as well. And McDuffie, by the way, he actually played more in the slot the game before their bye week than he has all season. He's always been getting some work in the slot this year, but week 9 was actually the first time that he played more in the slot than outside this season. So if that usage holds, McDuffie should be a better IDP option going forward as well. And we really saw it in that week 9 game. He had 12 tackles and a sack, something like that. So yeah, more of that. Yes, please, McDuff. Okay, Denver. So yeah, we got news this week that Alex Singleton, he's going to take some time off, had a cancerous tumor removed from his body. Obviously, this is scary stuff for him. I'm glad that obviously they caught it, and that it sounds like he's going to be back. It just won't be this week. Who knows if it'll be next week, but obviously, taking care of himself is the most important thing, right? So we'll keep an eye on it. It sounds like he's going to be back at some point, but for this week, it'll be Drake Greenlaw. I think that is going to take over as the lone full-time linebacker for Denver. So the Broncos, it's not a great matchup, a below average matchup as far as tackle potential goes. And Greenlaw hasn't played more than 65% of snaps in any game this season. But look, he's the established veteran there. He's the big name free agent that they brought in. We do expect them to start relying on him a little bit more. There's really no reason for them not to do that this week, especially with Singleton out of the lineup. So get well, Singleton. Hopefully everything's okay. But Dre Greenlaw this week is at least in play and ranked among the full-time linebackers this week. Justin Sternad, he's going to be on the lower end of part-time linebackers. We've talked about him. Yeah, he's come up with a few big plays, but it's like a 6.6% tackle rate, I believe, on the season. That is brutal for a linebacker. So yeah, he's really just kind of a low-end play this week and just for deeper leagues. Denver's defensive line, Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, not an easy path for them this week against the Chiefs. The Chiefs ranked top 5 in both pass blocking grade, and then obviously Patrick Mahomes also top 5 in pressure to sack conversion rate this season. Both players, they've been really good this season. They're both top 20 IDP scorers among defensive linemen. Benito's now top 5 with 9.5 sacks on the year. So we're going to mostly start them. The only thing is, again, it's just a matchup thing where we're tempering expectations, potentially lowering the ceiling for these guys. And it's possible, too, that Josh Simmons, left tackle for the Chiefs, is back this week. He hasn't played since week 5, but that does create a tougher matchup for Nick Bonito specifically, because Simmons owns a 71.2 pass blocking grade on the year. But slightly tempered expectations is all. And then Denver's defensive backs, Talanoa Hufanga has been on fire. Even Brandon Jones, really solid. Great matchup for these guys. So they'll be starters for us again. And then a poor matchup for the quarterbacks, unfortunately, for Riley Moss and company. Okay, on to Sunday Night Football now. The Detroit Lions and the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's start with Detroit's defensive backs, because it was a down week almost across the board for the Lions IDPs, which we'll get to in a second, except for Brian Branch, who led the team in tackles, added a sack. He's earned being talked about first here because he'll be locked into lineups as usual, getting a top 10 matchup for safety tackles this week. The only thing to keep an eye on is that he left last game early, looking a little banged up. Hopefully he's okay, but obviously if he can't go, we're not going to play him. Not sure if Kirby Joseph will be back this week. So Thomas Harper could be in play again as kind of a desperate fill-in option as needed because it is a good matchup. Lions linebackers. So yeah, even the Lions linebackers last week in a positive matchup didn't quite deliver as we expect from them. Jack Campbell specifically, we didn't we definitely expect more from him. We've been gassing him up for months on this show now, dating back to the summer. So it's fine, if he has a down game. And honestly, it might be another one this week because the Eagles offense has been awful for linebacker tackles, last in the league in that regard, and we'll probably see down games across the board again from the Lions linebackers, with Campbell still being the best bet to overcome the matchup. I'm still mostly starting him, but like Derek Barnes, lower end DL2 this week on Sleeper, where he has that eligibility just because of the bad matchup. But helping him, I think, still stay in starting consideration, I guess, is that the Eagles are giving up the 6 most tackles per game to opposing defensive linemen, which is where Barnes still spends a lot of his defensive snaps. So that does help. Detroit's defensive line, Hutch, unfortunately kept quiet last week against the Commanders. Doesn't get a lot easier here against a really good Eagles offensive line. It does help a little bit that Jalen Hurts is susceptible to sacks, so he'll still start for us pretty much all the time, just not necessarily a good spot for, again, another high ceiling game this week, unfortunately. Philadelphia, we'll start with their linebackers because Zach Bond and this Eagles linebacker core really draw a great matchup against the Lions. They have yielded the most tackles per game to the linebacker position this season. So Bond, we already know, mostly a locked-in starter every week. He's certainly not had the level of tackle production that he was delivering last season when he finished as the overall LB1, just an 11.7% tackle rate on the year. And he's the only linebacker inside the top 12 IDP scores at the position who actually comes in below 13% tackle rate in that regard, which is the average. So there is a risk of regression there. I'm not worried about that regression this week in a great matchup. So that should help him out in terms of his tackle opportunities. And then Nakobe Dean, more of a deep league option still. His snap share didn't really increase last week. He was luckily productive thanks to a sack, but just 65% of snaps for him over the last 2 weeks. So that's not ideal. And then Jihad Campbell played just 50% of snaps, with about a third of those snaps on the edge, even less ideal. So deeper leagues if you need them. Philly's defensive backs. So there was a little bit of concern, I think, last week for Cooper DeJean potentially losing some of his slot snaps with the team bringing in Michael Carter at the trade deadline. That did not end up being the case in week 10. Luckily, DeJean played 77% of his snaps in the slot this past week, and Carter just played 1 defensive snap. So yeah, DeJean's slot snap share should be safe. His IDP value obviously remains top tier for the cornerback position. And then this week he draws a positive matchup against the Lions, who are giving up the 7th most tackles per game to the cornerback position. So yeah, DeJean locked into CB required lineups. And then defensive lineman for the Eagles, Jalen Phillips made his debut last week. He looked great on Monday night against the Packers. Didn't get a sack, but he led that edge group in snaps, and he was really impactful with his playing time. He got 6 tackles, a couple QB hits, fumble recovery. Unfortunately, he's going to get a lot of Penei Sewell this week, so that'll limit his upside. But I think, considering the playing time, considering the tackle ability, and that the Lions are yielding the most tackles per game to opposing defensive linemen, he should at least be a really strong floor option this week for Jalen Phillips, that is. So, don't mind him. Nolan Smith also returned last week, but he was kind of eased in. He played just 28% of snaps. I'd expect that number to go up this week, potentially cut into Jalix Hunt's snaps a little bit. I know Hunt was great last week, had a couple of sacks, but still think he'd be the one to lose playing time if Smith is going to get more work. Also, Jalen Carter was really solid last week considering the matchup. He'll remain a starting DT option for the most part. And last game of the week, Monday Night Football, Dallas Cowboys, Las Vegas Raiders. We'll start with the Dallas linebacker situation because it is going to likely go through some changes here in the next few weeks, not just because they're coming out of their bye week, but they also acquired Logan Wilson at the trade deadline, and they have activated DeMarvion Overshown off IR. So there are obviously reinforcements coming for a linebacker core that has sucked this season, specifically Kenneth Murray. I have to imagine here that the plan is likely for Overshown and Logan Wilson to become the starters, which is going to end the IDP value of Kenneth Murray and Shamar James. I just don't know that that's going to happen right away in week 11. We'll see. It's possible. But I think for this week, Like, considering it's going to be the first time that Overshone and Logan Wilson will have played a game for the team this season, we're going to ease them in maybe a little bit into the lineup. We'll see how things go. I think for me, this Cowboys linebacker core is one to avoid this week, especially considering that it is a bad matchup against the Raiders, who are yielding the 26th most tackles per game to the linebacker position. So we can afford to wait on these guys. Worth stashing Overshone, worth stashing Logan Wilson. If you still have Kenneth Murray, if you still have Shamar James, you can hold them for one more week, see what the usage is. But my guess is that we're going to see those guys head to the bench for Overshone and Wilson. Dallas's defensive line, Quinnen Williams also going to make his Dallas debut this week, and really nice matchup for him to potentially make an immediate impact going against the Raiders, who rank bottom 10 in pass blocking grade this season with a 59.9. And then obviously Geno Smith also in the bottom 10 in terms of pressure to sack conversion rate, 23.3%. So unfortunately for Quinnen Williams, right now he's on a career low pace for his pass rush grade on the year, 57.1 so far this season. Somehow on a career best pace in terms of run defense grade at 90.8. So he'll look for his pass rush metrics, I think, to greatly improve with his new team, and he's definitely going to get the opportunity to do that right away. They're going to play him a ton. Obviously, they invested a ton to get him, so no reason to kind of ease him in. He should be out there quite a bit, especially coming off a back-to-back bye week for him. Also, Donovan Ezrakwu was looking much better for a stretch before the team's bye week. His playing time is there. The pass rush metrics have improved. And again, decent matchup here against Geno and the Raiders. I don't hate giving the rookie a shot this week. Again, depending on your other options. And then Dallas's defensive backs, Deron Bland should once again be a top cornerback required option in a great matchup. Raiders giving up the third most tackles per game to the cornerback position. Donovan Wilson, I think, will be back as well. Just a fine option. Nothing special there. And lastly, the Raiders will start with their defensive line, specifically Max Crosby. Gets a good enough matchup here this week, mostly because the Cowboys' offensive line has been doo-doo. But Dak has been one of the best in the league at not letting pressures turn into sacks. So doesn't mean that he can't get sacks, but he's not making it easy on our pass rushers. So hopefully Max can at least get one this week. Malcolm Kuntz, he lost snaps to Charles Snowden last week as well, so he doesn't seem like it's an option. Snowden, not really an option either. It could be, but just depends on the matchup, and we'll want to see that snap share remain solid for him. Raiders linebackers, Devin White, still a fine start this week. He's the lone every down linebacker there in Las Vegas. It's a below average matchup this week for tackles, but he's been mostly good this year for IDP. The LB2 role for the Raiders is more of a question mark because of Landon Roberts. He played just 41% of the snaps last week, and Jamal Adams played 48%. So a rotation is happening there. It's another situation to mostly avoid, especially in a poor matchup. We'll see if Adams gets up there and takes over like the clear LB2 duties. If he does, then that could be nice for a player who will be DB eligible in pretty much all formats. And if that snap share is around like 70 to 80% of snaps, like we could get some good use out of that for IDP. But for now, more of just kind of a speculative ad for those that are interested in Jamal Adams potentially taking over that LB2 role. And then the Raiders defensive backs, great matchup for the cornerback tackles. Unfortunately, the Raiders only have one cornerback actually playing enough snaps right now, and that's Eric Stokes. I know Caillou Blue Kelly had 2 picks last week, but he also played below 50% of the snaps. Maybe he's earned more playing time, but in week 11, that's not something I'm willing to risk, considering that he was playing like exclusively on special teams the week before last. So, yeah. In this matchup, it's mostly just Jeremy Chin at the safety position. He's been really solid, led the team in tackles last week, actually played more in the slot than usual last week, but still a 100% snap player and hanging around the line of scrimmage more often than not is what we want here. All right, that's it. Thank you all for tuning in. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, all those kinds of things. I greatly appreciate that. As always, you can check out all of my work over at pff.com with a PFF Plus subscription, including the IDP Fantasy Report, IDP Rankings, Wide Receiver Man Zone Coverage Report, Red Zone Report, all that stuff. Be sure to use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off of that subscription. And as always, feel free to ask questions in the comment section. I will always do my best to answer them all. Hopefully I didn't miss any last week. I can't remember. Yeah, hopefully not. But I always try to get them all. If I missed you, it was not intentional. Please just feel free to ask your questions as they come to you, and I'll be happy to answer. Good luck this week, and until next time, peace out.